Hello, welcome to Daily Devotions. I'm Pastor David Schoob at Trinity Lutheran Church in West Bend. Our reading for today comes from the 15th chapter of Luke's Gospel. It's a story I think most people have heard at one time or another. Then Jesus said there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to be one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his field to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I'm dying of hunger. I'll get up, I'll go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father, but while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound.' Then the brother became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" So which are you? The older son or the younger son? Come on, fess up to yourself. I had a group that really got into this once when we talked about it, the older children against the younger children. They kind of began to push each other. It was pretty interesting to listen to. I've probably been both at one time or another. As a pastor, you probably have more of that older son syndrome, but yeah, there have been times when I scream to God and I'm tired of trying to live up to what I'm supposed to do. Can't I just go and do whatever I want? I say to myself. The strange truth is that there is danger and promise in either one. To break from all that has been and strike off on our own may lead to new and exciting possibilities. And yet, what happens when we find ourselves totally lost? And sticking with the things that always have been because they're safe and we know them, and we can end up, though, telling ourselves that our faithfulness is better than anybody else's. It's so easy to begin to creep into that self-righteous certainty. The problem is that with both, the father is in many ways forgotten. Each son begins to see themselves as the center of all things, and in so doing loses track of the fact that the father's love is the most precious reality that they have. Again, assuming the Father is an image of God, God continues to embrace both in love. The main picture in the story is not the actions of each of the sons, but the loving action of the Father. In rebellion or in sanctimonious self-righteousness, God still loves us. So maybe we can learn to love ourselves and others in the midst of our rebellion or self-righteousness. I've always loved this story that I found a number of years ago. Emma stomped up the church steps and unlocked the front door. Her dinner appointment had kept her much later than she planned, and now she must hurry if she wanted to make it home on foot before dark. Walking home alone after dark was a serious concern, but it couldn't deter her from her family duty. Keys still in hand, and without stopping to remove her coat, boots, or scarf, Emma plodded to the storage closet near the secretary's office. She unlocked the door and turned on the light. There in its place on the back shelf, encased in a handmade velvet cover, sat Grandfather Norman's cross. She removed the faded maroon cover, respectfully folded it and placed it on the shelf, and then she lifted the heavy gold-plated cross, which was very nearly as big as she, and gingerly backed out of the closet. She took extra care not to bump one of the cross pieces' arms against the woodwork. Grandfather Norman had purchased this cross in the Holy Land in 1902 and had shipped it home at great cost as a gift to his church. After all these years, it fell on her shoulders to see to its care and placement every week. Not that there would be such a need if certain circumstances hadn't come about. Emma staggered a bit under the sheer magnitude of her burden as she made her way to the elevator. Once inside, she set the cross down on the carpeted floor and pressed the up button. There was a slight shudder as the door closed and the compartment rose toward the sanctuary. If it weren't for certain circumstances and stubborn mules like Harvey Volkman, she wouldn't have been making these weekly rounds for the past 10 years. Most of the younger members of the church knew nothing about the circumstances. Most of the longtime members didn't care. But it was a matter of family honor for Emma and a matter of pigheadedness, she could testify, on Harvey Volkman's part. Because Harvey had been the one who had brought up the idea of the old rugged cross in the first place. 15 years earlier, on March 12, 1980, Harvey Volkman had raised the idea of replacing Grandfather Norman's beautiful gold Holy Land cross with a rough-hewn, life-sized wooden cross. It would come complete with 3 metal spikes embedded where Christ's hands and feet would have been. To Emma's mother's horror, the worship task force had referred the idea to the trustees, and the trustees had actually brought it before the church council for discussion. Well, of course, Emma's mother had objected to such a ridiculous idea. She stated quite eloquently the importance of her father's loving and beautiful contribution to the worship experience of the church. And Harvey Volkman had the gall to call Grandfather's cross a gaudy museum piece that had nothing to do with Jesus or his sacrifice for us. Well, the battle raged back and forth with members taking sides until finally the council chair had the presence of mind to table the discussion until a study could be done. Unfortunately, a mere 5 years later, their new pastor began a Saturday night service, and she bought Harvey Volkman's idea hook, line, and sinker. The morning after the first Saturday night service, Emma and her mother entered the sanctuary early to find that the old rugged cross still standing in the chancel. Grandfather Norman's cross had unceremoniously been dumped behind the altar out of the way. From that Sunday until her death, Emma's mother had carefully put the Holy Land cross away in the cover she made for it in the locked closet every Saturday morning, and she lovingly returned to the altar after services every Saturday night for the past 10 years. The duty had now fallen on Emma. She lifted the cross into her arms again. There was a strange pause when the elevator stopped just before the doors slid open, and when they did, there stood Harvey Volkman, punching at the elevator buttons with the old rugged cross perched on his shoulder, just like Jesus on his way to Golgotha. When he saw Emma, he snorted, kind of like an old bull, and instead of stepping aside to let her out, he barged right ahead, jamming that oversized woodworking reject right as the cross... as he brought it into the elevator door, so Emma couldn't even pass. While he tried to heft it around so that it stood upright, he dumped the cross-arm piece into the button panel, which closed the door and started them down. Then when he tried to turn to stop it, he bumped the buttons again, and the elevator jolted to a halt halfway between the floors. Emma was fully prepared to tear into Harvey for his rudeness until she saw the surprised look on his face and realized that he hadn't really meant to get them stuck. After a few minutes of his button-punching, door-pounding, and calling for help, she set grandfather's cross in the safety of the corner behind her. She helped lift the old, rugged cross off Harvey's shoulders and lean it against the wall. Then she sat down as daintily as the limited space would allow. When another 40 minutes had passed without any hope of rescue, Harvey Volkman did the same. It was about 9:30 when Pastor Jones looked out her dining room window and noticed there were still lights on in the church. She had thought Harvey Volkman would turn them off when he put the cross away after the 5 o'clock service, as he always did. Running over to switch them off was no chore, and while she was there, she remembered that she'd left her sermon notes on the pulpit. When she tried to take the elevator up to the sanctuary to get them, it didn't work, and she called the janitor. Emma patted her hair and lifted Grandfather Norman's Holy Land cross into her arms when the elevator began to move again. After a lot of hammering and cussing by the janitor, she couldn't quite describe the look on the pastor and janitor's face when the doors slid open to reveal her and Harvey bearing their various crosses. Nor would she have attempted to relate their reactions when Harvey shifted his burden onto the janitor with instructions to dump it in the trash, and she deposited hers in the pastor's arms, suggesting that it might be permanently placed on the chapel altar. They said they planned to share the expense of providing a new cross for the sanctuary. It was to be chosen by the worship task force and the trustees. Their chins really hit the floor, though, when Harvey held out his arm to Emma and asked her to join him for a cup of coffee, after which he would give her a ride home. No one has ever told just what occurred in that elevator in those 3.5 hours, but it has a lasting effect on Emma and Harvey and on the church as well. I wonder if the brothers in Jesus' story ever really learned to see each other through God's eyes. I wonder if we ever will. Let us pray. Rebellion and self-righteousness fill the hearts of all your children, and yet you never stop looking for them. Help us to never stop looking as well. Amen. Well, wherever you are, God is waiting for you to come home. May you find a blessed welcome when you enter God's presence. Have a great day.